I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm copying my boyfriend by using a shield build, because we're talking about my most overrated bosses from each Soulsborne game. So a few months ago, I talked about the bosses I felt were underrated, link in the description, and now it's time to flip the script. My concept of overrated is a little more on the diplomatic side though, because a majority of the fights on this list are ones I do still actually enjoy. Perhaps even bosses that I also overrated in the grand scheme of things. I might list bosses that will horrify you, but it's okay, we can get through this together. So let's begin the most overrated bosses from each Soulsborne game, ranked. Let me know which bosses you want to connect more with in the comments down below. Demon Souls is in this weird middle ground compared to the rest of the series, as I truly don't think a single boss in this game is overrated. In fact, a majority of the fights in this game are either so janky they're bad, or underappreciated in the community as a whole. So even though I actually do enjoy this fight, and I feel it is underrated in terms of the overall Soulsborne series, I think based solely on the game it's from, the Penetrator is the most overrated boss in Demon Souls. Not because the fight plays badly, far from it, but because the moveset of this boss is just so ancient in comparison to what players are used to now in FromSoft's outings. Going back to fight the Penetrator after having any experience with another Souls game is like bullying a toddler. His design is sick, his sword is iconic, and his animations are really fun to watch, dance-like in their movements. But I can't deny that for all the hype this boss had on the run-up to my first playthrough of Demon Souls, the actual fight was just over far too quickly. His attacks are easy to block or dodge through, and his health pool isn't terribly large if you've done enough of the other Archstones before tackling 1-3. You can tell he's a prototype for the fights that FromSoftware are now known for, and sadly that means he's just a bit outdated as a result. I could say the same thing about old King Allant too, with his rigid movements that are easy to predict, but I think he puts up a bit more of a fight, and it would be a gag if I ranked my favourite boss in the game as the most overrated. This really felt like a by default choice. When it comes to Dark Souls, there's one boss that stands head and shoulders above the rest in terms of overratedness, and that is Ornstein and Smough. I don't think this comes as a shock to anyone watching, given how this pair was touted around for years as the hardest fight in gaming by every single journalist under the sun, and was an absolute brutal hurdle to overcome, right? While that was my initial experience with these two, that doesn't mean those feelings hold weight in 2024. The fight does a lot right, with Ornstein and Smough having complementary movesets that cover for each other's weaknesses. The arena is designed in such a way where you can funnel each boss to separate them from the other for quick damage, and the second phase, being determined by whom you slay first, is still one of the coolest ideas from early FromSoft boss design. But I've always been a proponent that while I do adore this fight, there's a lot of jank. Mainly from Ornstein, as his movement and moveset just don't match up well with Dark Souls 1's animations. The way he jankily dashes across the arena with the tracking of a homing missile is hilarious yet painful to watch. His aggression when he pulls out the lightning spears always feels so lax, and sometimes you can get caught in situations where both bosses are being aggressive, leading you to take damage you can't avoid. Woedenaz suffer from being too overhyped for their own good, to the point where people were arriving at their boss arena expecting this insane level of difficulty, when in reality they just require decent positioning and a good mastery of your movement options to win the fight. In that sense, I understand why they'd be considered overrated, and I can't think of another fight in Dark Souls that could fill this spot. So thank God we're past the point where every boss was compared to this duo, because, you know, that means nature is healing. After my last playthrough of Dark Souls 2, there was one boss fight that I was extremely high on going in that just didn't do it for me in the same way on my return visit, and that is the Lost Sinner. Likely the first of the 4 Lord Souls that players will face off against, she's found in a pitch-black room and wields a large sword that can very easily clip your health bar from full to 0 in a minute. Her gimmick is that you can't lock onto her from far away unless you light the torches above the arena via the Bastille key. Once lit, you can lock on like any other boss, and the fight just becomes a simple sword battle. I like the concept of the gimmick a lot, and I think the Lost Sinner definitely has some pluses when it comes to her design, and the way in which she moves and attacks, but ultimately it's a sword fight duel in a game that is filled to the brim with other boss fights against similar enemy types. The Lost Sinner doesn't have the difficulty or the uniqueness aside from having a larger than average sword to stand out against bosses like Velstadt, the Pursuer, the Looking Glass Knight, Fume Knight, or Sir Elon. And yet I feel of the four lords, she's the one that has the most love from the fanbase, while I personally feel Freya and the Rotten, while I may not enjoy their fights as much, I think are just more interesting as a result. And when I'm saying I would rather go against the giant spider boss given I'm an arachnophobe, that is saying something. God, my takes in this video are actually so lukewarm, it's not even funny. I think we need to change that. He may be my fourth favorite boss in Bloodborne, but the way everyone talks about him like he's the best of the best, I just can't relate. It's Ludwig the Holy Blade. I can already hear the gasps of horror in the audience, but let me explain myself. I do love Ludwig as said fourth favorite boss. I think his moveset is extremely fun in both phases, taking two very distinct styles and mixing them together to create a unique and memorable experience. He has one of the most iconic cutscenes in Soulsborne history, and that's something I just can't take away from him, and the music in the second phase is one of the best in the game, and yet I just can't consider him my favorite when Gehrman, Maria, and the Orphan are right there. Bloodborne's fights are at their best to me when facing down either another hunter, or in the case of the Orphan, a creature that's at least on similar footing to you for the fight. Ludwig, meanwhile, still has classic issues where the camera just doesn't want to work in the first phase of the fight, and some of the attacks, like him jumping on the ceiling, feel very trial and error to dodge. I may also just be salty that in my first time playing the DLC, I died to him like 60 plus times, and it just wasn't as fun as I thought it would be. He does a lot right, and thematically hits as one of the best bosses in the game, but Gehrman's music hits harder for me, Maria's escalation of her fight just feels more fun to me, and the Orphan is just my favorite fight. Oop, my bias is showing. I just don't know how I could justify putting Ludwig above those three, which is why I'm considering him overrated. As said, this topic is very dumb. He's another case of a boss that sadly has been hit by the overhyped train, and yet I can still see completely where people are coming from. I just really am bad at this topic. I adore all of the bosses in these games so much. Oh my god, it's March already? And we're getting closer to my goal of 20,000 subscribers by the summer of 2024. Insert obligatory YouTuber, look at how many of you aren't subscribed comment here. If by the end of the video you enjoy what you watch, consider parrying that subscribe button to stay up to date on all of my future videos. Back to our regularly scheduled programming. For Dark Souls 3, I actually have a pick that I feel quite strongly is overrated, and that's Yhorm the Giant. As someone who generally likes cinematic fights, see my love of the Storm King, Rykard, even the Divine Dragon from Sekiro, I can't help but feel there's this weird disconnect between Yhorm and I. For one, his boss fight has no real build-up. We get his opening movie cinematic, and then it's radio silence until we run into him at the profaned capital. With the Abyss Watchers, we had the battles going on outside their mausoleum, and the NPC at Firelink who used to be one of them. For Aldrich, we have an entire previous zone dedicated to him in the form of the Cathedral of the Deep, plus his connection to Anri's questline that builds him up as this figure you want to fight. Yhorm has the Sigvard questline, but we don't even know that Sigvard is related to Yhorm's history unless we complete his full quest and have him arrive with us to face down the boss together. There's just no narrative build-up outside of the bare minimum, and if you're going to be a boss that focuses on cinematics over complex gameplay, I need that story to bolster my enjoyment. It's just charging the Storm Ruler and watching Yorm's health tick down, maybe dodge a few attacks when he embers up, but when compared to Rykard, who allows you to use an entire moveset as opposed to a singular special move to do decent damage, Yorm feels disappointing by comparison. Even the Storm King from Demon Souls, who has the exact same premise as Yorm, had enemies in the boss room that made it a little more difficult to hit the main beast. Dark Souls 2 got done so dirty in the third game, and the main representative of the Giants having a blink-and-you-miss-it fight just disappoints me so much, which is why I find it insane that people have Yorm as one of their favorites. I get loving cinematic battles, I just really don't see how Yorm justifies earning that title outside of the developers doing the bare minimum to hype him up, and I am going to die on that hill. I'm sorry. Sekiro is another game where I genuinely don't think there are any overrated fights. They're all properly valued within the community, and by no means am I looking to start another war with the Sekiro fanbase following the great "Sekiro is my 5th favourite Soulsborne game" comment from last year. But just like Bloodborne, as it turns out, my 4th favourite boss in the game is often considered the best by everyone else, and while I understand their reasoning, it just doesn't click for me, and that's enough justification for me to put Owl Father on this list. Oh no! To start off with, I really enjoy the challenge that Owl Father brings to Sekiro's endgame. As said, 4th favourite boss, let's keep that in mind. He, along with Ishin, are the last truly hard bosses you'll face on the road to completion, and the fact that you're getting to fight your father in a battle where he truly treats you like an equal is magical. He doesn't use any of his tricks from his prior fight, preferring to best you with pure skill and his owl in Phase 2 that allows him to teleport around the room. And yet I actually find his first fight, Great Shinobi Owl, to be the more interesting of his 2 appearances, because his original battle feels so different to everything else in the game. The music is dark and foreboding, showcasing that this is a man of deception. His moveset with the poison, the anti-healing bombs, the shuriken, he's using all your tools, and even attempts to trick you with a Dr. Wily-style beg for forgiveness moment. And I just find all of this far more interesting than a battle against super strong past Papa. Admittedly, of all the fights on today's list, Owl Father is the one I can see having the biggest case for deserving the praise he gets, because he does, he fully does. It's just that he's the one fight out of those constantly receiving praise to the point of potentially being overrated that I'm not quite as high on, so it was, as said at the start of this part, a placement by default. For the final entry on today's list, I'm approaching from a different perspective. So hear me out. I know that Godfrey, First Elden Lord, also known as Horaloo Warrior, is a great fight. He's in my top 10 for Elden Ring, but as I said in my boss ranking last year, and I'm saying again now, I feel there's something about the way I play these games that is stopping me from being able to place him on the highest pedestal like so many other players and content creators out there. I want to understand just why Godfrey is considered one of the best bosses in the game, bar none, because I just don't get it from my experiences. Phase 1 Godfrey is a lot of fun, with large AoEs, well-telegraphed attacks, and fair combos that feel easily punishable once learned. In fact, had the entire fight stayed like this, I might be more inclined to rank him higher. But Horaloo really makes me conflicted. His attacks are so delayed and hard to read once he breaks out the monk moveset, something both I and my partner both experienced in our respective playthroughs. He's got an amazing design and a really fun visual style, but in terms of his Phase 2 moveset, I've just never been able to get to grips with it. It feels so at odds to everything else the game throws at you, which can be good, but the amount of delayed attacks and weird grabs that launch you at unnatural momentum just kills the excitement for me. It looks too goofy. Do I love it from a story perspective? God, yes. Sarosh getting his jaw unhinged is horrific, and Horaloo getting to let his hair down and bathe in his blood is a great character choice. I just wish I wasn't always so on the back foot with his moveset. Perhaps if I ever took the time to learn every intricacy it has, maybe I'd be higher as a result. but I'm finding myself with less and less time in my life to dedicate to learning a boss's patterns to that insane level of degree, so I guess I'll stick to you guys explaining why Godfrey isn't overrated in the comments. Lord knows I'd have had to leave the internet if I made this segment about Melania. And that's my list. Which bosses are overrated in your eyes, and why do you think that is? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future videos. You can also support the channel via becoming a YouTube channel member for just $4.99 a month. You get your name at the end of videos, in the description, and early access to my Tuesday videos when applicable. My socials are on screen now, feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter, my Blue Sky, or my Discord, whatever you are comfortable with. And a massive shout out to both my YouTube channel members, you guys are amazing, for another month of support, and my patrons. Thank you so much to you guys as well. I will be phasing Patreon out towards the summer of this year in favor of the YouTube channel memberships, but for whoever you are, supporting me wherever you are, you're all amazing. So I'll see you next time. Adios.